The ground beneath your feet may be hiding a secret. What if I told you that some of the most desperate battles in history were fought not in open fields or sprawling cities, but in pitch-black tunnels, whispering with danger, beneath the very earth we walk on? From labyrinthine fortresses to chilling underground duels, entire wars have raged where sunlight never reached, and history nearly forgot them. Picture this. It's 1917, and the thunder of artillery shakes the soil along the Western Front. But while the world's gaze is fixed on the muddy trenches above, hundreds of men are locked in a silent, invisible war below. They're tunneling through the earth, laying explosives beneath enemy lines, fighting to outwit, outpace, and, if necessary, outsurvive the enemy in suffocating darkness. The war beneath the trenches, the Great War's deadly secret, was as pivotal as anything fought on the surface. But how did these underground wars begin, and what hidden battlefields have we lost to time? Let's dig deeper. The idea of fighting beneath the ground isn't new. In fact, it's as old as warfare itself. Thousands of years before the First World War, ancient armies realized that if you couldn't storm a city's walls, maybe you could burrow beneath them. Imagine you're a defender in ancient Nineveh or Babylon. The enemy is outside your gates, but your real fear is the ominous, muffled sound of scraping and digging below. Any day now, the ground might erupt, your walls could collapse, and chaos would pour in. This was mining warfare, and it was an ancient obsession. Roman soldiers, for example, were masters of siegecraft. At the siege of Dura Europus in the 3rd century AD, defenders and attackers clashed in a deadly underground chess match. Archaeologists found the charred remains of Persian and Roman soldiers tangled together in collapsed tunnels. Evidence of a primitive form of chemical warfare, where pitch and sulfur were set alight to suffocate the enemy in the darkness. But let's leap ahead to one of the most haunting chapters of underground warfare, the siege mines of the Middle Ages. If you've ever wandered the ruins of a medieval castle, say, Dover Castle in England or Château Gaillard in France, have you wondered why their walls are sometimes so thick, so oddly shaped? It's not just for show. Medieval defenders knew that attackers would try to dig saps, or tunnels under the walls, propping them up with wooden beams, and fill them with combustibles. When set alight, the beams would collapse, bringing down the wall above in a roaring avalanche of stone and dust. If you were a defender, your only hope might be to listen, literally. Men would lie with their ears to the ground, desperate to catch the faintest sound of enemy miners. If you heard them, you could dig a countermine. Sometimes these tunnels met in the darkness, and hand-to-hand combat would erupt in the choking black, the only illumination the flicker of a torch or the flash of a drawn sword. Who won these duels? Often, nobody. The tunnels would collapse, or both sides would suffocate, their stories lost to the earth. But if you think this was just a medieval problem, think again. The American Civil War brought mining warfare into the industrial age. At the Siege of Petersburg in 1864, Union soldiers dug a massive tunnel beneath Confederate lines, packed it with 4 tons of black powder, and unleashed an explosion so powerful it left a crater 170 feet long and 30 feet deep. But what happened next was a tragedy. Poorly trained Union troops charged straight into the crater, becoming trapped and easy targets for counterattacks. Hundreds died in minutes. Today, the crater at Petersburg is a silent scar on the landscape, a reminder of a hidden war with devastating consequences. Let's return to the First World War, the mother of all underground wars. The Western Front was a checkerboard of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. Above ground, a meat grinder. But below ground, a different war was being waged by men known as sappers, or tunnelers. British, German, French, Australian, and Canadian miners burrowed deep beneath no man's land, sometimes within feet of each other. The goal? To plant enormous mines under enemy positions and detonate them at the perfect moment. The most famous of these underground cataclysms came at Messines Ridge in 1917. For over a year, British and Australian sappers tunneled beneath German lines, creating 19 separate mines filled with 450 tons of explosives. On June 7, at precisely 3:10 a.m., the mines were detonated. The earth erupted in a blast so loud that it was heard as far away as London. 10,000 German soldiers were killed in seconds. One British General Riley commented, "Gentlemen, we may not change history tomorrow, but we shall certainly alter the geography." He was right. The landscape was forever transformed, and the shockwaves of that moment are still felt in the land today. But as with so many hidden wars, the cost was immense. For the men below, life was a nightmare. Imagine working in total darkness, the ceiling threatening to collapse with every vibration, the air growing thinner as you dig deeper. Water might flood the tunnel. Poisonous gas could seep in. And always, the sinister threat of enemy miners listening, digging, waiting to break through and attack. It was a world where silence meant survival, and the only certainty was fear. And what of the tunnels that remain? Today, historians and urban explorers sometimes stumble upon forgotten labyrinths beneath old battlefields, collapsed shafts, rusted tools, even the remains of men who never saw the sun again. These are time capsules of terror and ingenuity, reminders of a war within a war. But let's go even further east, to Vietnam, and the infamous Siu Kai tunnels. Here, underground combat reached a new level of complexity and brutality. The Viet Cong built over 150 miles of tunnels beneath the countryside, an entire subterranean world, with command centers, hospitals, and arms factories. American and South Vietnamese troops called them Black Echo, places where every sound was a warning, every shadow could be deadly. Fighting in the tunnels demanded a special kind of soldier, the so-called tunnel rats. Armed with a flashlight, a pistol, and almost inhuman calm, these men would crawl into pitch-dark passages barely wide enough to squeeze through, searching for hidden traps, booby wires, or enemy fighters waiting in ambush. The psychological toll was enormous. Every sense was on high alert. The faintest breath, the scrape of a sandal, the smell of cordite or decaying earth. For these men, the enemy could be inches away, or nowhere at all. What was it like? One tunnel rat, John Plaster, remembered. You were never really sure what was waiting around the next corner. You just went, because someone had to. Sometimes, the enemy would be lying in wait. Sometimes, the tunnels would collapse. Sometimes, the only thing you found was darkness, and your own heartbeat. The Siu Kai tunnels were so effective that entire battalions could vanish underground, reappear miles away, strike, and disappear again. American forces tried everything. Flooding the tunnels, filling them with gas, even training dogs to sniff out entrances. But the tunnel network was vast and resilient, proof that the war beneath the surface could be as decisive as any battle above. But Vietnam was hardly the last word in underground warfare. In the Middle East, from ancient times to the present, subterranean conflict has been a constant. The city of Jerusalem, for example, is honeycombed with tunnels dug during centuries of siege and rebellion. During the First Jewish-Roman War in 70 CE, defenders used hidden passages to move supplies and launch surprise attacks. In more recent decades, underground tunnels have been used by insurgent groups to bypass blockades and launch attacks, a modern twist on an ancient strategy. And then there's the city of Sarajevo, besieged during the 1990s Balkan Wars. When the city was cut off by enemy forces, desperate residents dug a tunnel beneath the airport, just big enough to carry supplies, weapons, and sometimes even the wounded. It was called the Tunnel of Hope, and for thousands, it was the only lifeline. It was a reminder that underground warfare isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, it's a fight for survival, for connection, for a future. Let's not forget the Second World War, when underground battlefields took on new and terrifying forms. In the Pacific, at places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Japanese forces transformed entire islands into underground fortresses, networks of tunnels, bunkers, and hidden artillery positions. American troops, expecting a swift victory, were instead sucked into a nightmare of ambushes and counterattacks, never knowing what waited around the next bend. At Iwo Jima, the Japanese commander, General Kuribayashi, ordered his men to dig more than 11 miles of tunnels through solid volcanic rock. The strategy? To bleed the enemy dry, inch by inch, in a war of attrition fought in the dark. American soldiers found themselves fighting not just for ground, but for every foot of tunnel. Sometimes, flamethrowers and grenades were the only way to clear the passages, but the psychological cost was immense. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost in the blackness. And what about the underground bunkers of London and Berlin? In World War II, cities became targets, and survival meant going below. The London Underground became an improvised shelter from the Blitz, with thousands of civilians huddling in the darkness as bombs rained down. Meanwhile, beneath Berlin, Hitler's bunker became the epicenter of the Third Reich's final days. A subterranean fortress that could not save its master from the collapse above. But it's not just war that hides beneath our cities. The Paris catacombs, a labyrinth beneath the French capital, were used as hideouts by resistance fighters during World War II. The tunnels of Odessa in Ukraine sheltered partisans fighting Nazi occupiers. Beneath the surface, stories of resistance, ingenuity, and survival echo through the ages. So why do we overlook the wars fought beneath the ground? Is it because they're invisible, hidden from maps and memory alike? Or is it that we fear what we cannot see, that the earth itself could become an enemy, swallowing up men and machines in silence? Yet time and again, history tells us that the fate of cities, nations, and even empires has often been decided in the darkness below. Let's pause and imagine. How many forgotten battlefields still lie beneath our feet, waiting to be discovered? How many stories are sealed in earth and stone, ghosts of wars that shaped the world above? Archaeologists are still finding new tunnels, new evidence, every year, sometimes revealing entire networks that once held the fate of armies in their claustrophobic grip. There's something haunting about these secret battlefields. They remind us that history is not always what it seems on the surface. For every famous battle, there may be an invisible war fought in silence, with courage, desperation, and sometimes despair as the only witnesses. The men and women who fought in these underground wars often went unrecognized, their sacrifices literally buried. But their stories matter. They remind us of the extremes humanity will go to. Sometimes for conquest, sometimes for survival, sometimes just to hold on to hope in the darkest of places. So next time you walk across a field, pass a crumbling fortress, or ride the subway beneath a modern city, ask yourself, what hidden wars might have raged beneath your feet? What secrets does the earth hold, and what lessons do they have for us today? If you found these stories of secret underground wars as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us here at History Owl. There are countless forgotten chapters of history waiting to be uncovered, and together, we'll keep digging. Until next time, keep your eyes open, and maybe, your ears to the ground.